Hi guys, welcome back to another video. So I was kind of like browsing around in my Procreate gallery and realized that I haven't been doing a lot of Honkai Star Rail fan art in a little bit other than drawing Dan Heng over and over again. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to do another kind of like sketch page style similar to the one I did I think last week or the previous week, like I did with the 17 little sketches. So let's hop back into my Honkai Star Rail folder and let's draw Aventurine. So technically the reason why I wanted to even do a sketch page instead of like a more thought out illustration or a finished illustration of Aventurine. So he is a character from Honkai Star Rail, if you're not familiar with that series. And he was kind of released earlier this week, so hopefully your pulls went well if you were summoning for him or you're summoning for Jing Liu, or if you're playing Tears of Themis, hopefully your Artem pulls went well as well. But back to sketch pages. So one thing I really like about doing kind of like this format or layout whenever I do multiple drawings of a character or of different characters, it just kind of allows me to play around a little bit with the format or like kind of not exactly the composition, but kind of slotting the character into different, I guess, like poses or framing them a little bit different depending on the space. And I was having a little bit of a hard time kind of thinking on how I wanted to draw him specifically for a drawing or like a full illustration. So instead, we are going to be doing, I think we're only doing 3 drawings today, or sketches in this case. Now, I don't want people to get too mixed up with the idea of me calling these sketches or like a sketch page. I'm more or less referring to the fact that usually when I do these, I don't render them to the most finished kind of degree, if anything. So I tend to make them a little bit more, I don't know, like unfinished. So you can still see some of the sketch lines here and there. Sometimes I don't like clean up the lines super cleanly. Some of the colors are a little bit blotchy. Some things are just left unfinished or not very defined. And it's more or less kind of like a work in progress, but I have no intentions of ever coming back. So I kind of leave it in a very, I guess, like a cleaner, unfinished state, if anything. So hopefully that doesn't give people the wrong idea that doing kind of like full color with some rendering is considered a sketch. It's just more like a thing how I categorize my own drawing, just because it's not technically finished in a sense. But it's like, at least to me, it's nowhere near like being a finished product, nor do I have the intent to do so. So I kind of just leave things at an unfinished state, like deliberately. Hopefully that makes sense. But I guess like how I approach doing these kind of sketch pages is very similar to how I sketch in my sketchbook. So I usually pick one side of the page or the canvas in this case, and I kind of fan outwards and move away from the starting sketch that I started off with. So in this case, we are starting in the bottom right, and then I am probably going to the bottom left and kind of into the upper middle portion of the canvas. And I kind of treat these with the same steps that I do for just like my finished drawings. So I will sketch with the sketch round brush. After that, I will kind of do either a background or some sort of like backdrop color of some sort to kind of give me a color base. After that, I will fill in the color of the figure or whatever I drew, and then we can do the rough colors and then rendering a little bit at the very end. But for the most part, I do just let my mind kind of wander and draw whatever I think would fit in the certain spaces here. So like I mentioned, I did not really have a plan in terms of how I wanted to do any kind of illustrations for Aventurine. So it's kind of a good way for me to knock out ideas or even use these sketches for potential, I guess, like candidates for the finished illustration that I would like to make eventually. But for now, I'm just gonna let myself get used to drawing him, which I think is a little bit beneficial as well if kind of like doing repetition really nails the character's design into your brain. Because usually, even like in my sketchbooks or if I want to do it digitally, if I am not very confident with drawing a certain character or I want to get more comfortable with the character's design, I often do like a spread of just the character themselves so that I can kind of commit portions of their design to memory. And I mentioned this in the past when I drew like a lot more Genshin characters, that there are some Genshin characters where their designs are like permanently imprinted into my mind just because the amount of times that I've drawn them, that I have a rough general basis to what their design looks like. And I feel like a lot of the Mondstadt characters are like that. Liyue is a little bit harder for me. And then obviously as we get further and further away from like the initial influx of characters at the very beginning of Genshin, it was just a little bit easier for me to remember. But Honkai Star Rail, I haven't drawn a lot of the characters in this kind of like character roster, so there's a lot of designs that I'm just like super unfamiliar with, but I have drawn Aventurine once for a video. I believe it was like an alcohol marker video at some point, and I've been trying to doodle him here and there in my sketchbook as well. I just really like his character. I do like his backstory as well, so I don't want to give any spoilers if you haven't played the current patch, I think. No, the previous patch, like 2.1. No, it's this current patch. Yes, 2.1, I believe. So yeah, but I did end up getting Aventurine in the end, which is kind of nice. So I think after Black Swan, I was saving up quite a bit, and I knew I wanted to summon for Aventurine. I'm still debating on who else do I want to summon for. If Firefly becomes available as a summonable character, I would love to summon for her for sure. But I'm still debating on if I want Robin or Sunday in the end as well. Do let me know if you are playing Honkai Star Rail, by the way, and let me know who's your favorite character and who's like an upcoming character that you wish to potentially summon for. Because at least for me, I've been very like indecisive with who I'm pulling for in Honkai Star Rail. And for the most part, a lot of like my impulsive summoning has gone well. I think the only character that I technically missed that I wanted initially was probably Sparkle, but I think that's okay. I didn't like dump a whole lot of my Stellar Jades or like my tickets into it, so I decided that I would just save for Aventurine because I knew he was coming up. So in terms of the gacha luck, I ended up getting Aventurine. Luckily, I didn't get pity broken. So I was able to move on to the light cone banner, and for the light cone banner I did get pity broken, but eventually got his light cone in the very end with still I think 6k Stellar Jades left, so it's not too bad. I'll just continue saving up for the next character potentially for the future. But with the sketches done, let's go ahead and move on to the coloring. So I went ahead and duplicated my sketch. I turned one of my sketches to multiply to prep it for the coloring portion. I made a new layer and dropped kind of like a reddish color to the background. I did want it to be slightly more pinkish rather than too orangey, even though I think like a more orangey or yellowy red that's like on the warmer side would have matched nicely as well. Aventurine's color palette is like one of my favorites, and I think it's just because like I am very drawn to the particular almost like greenish turquoise kind of color that he wears, and I do like the kind of like accessories, a little bit of pop of red, some gold, black, and a little bit of white, so he has a good range of colors. But because he doesn't have like a significant amount of red anywhere, I am going to be using red as the background so that his hair alongside with his jacket and kind of like his shirt and collar can kind of stand out from the background. So I think I showed that I ended up putting a grid patterning in the back as well. I'm gonna fiddle with the background a little bit later, and I kind of wish I didn't end up doing what I ended up doing, but it's gonna be an easy fix if I do want to eventually change it in the future for whatever reason. But after that, I've been using the selection or like lasso tool to do kind of an easier way of filling in the colors for the figure. So I just kind of select all the way around for the character. There's like a color fill option, which easily kind of like buckets the entire selection with whatever selected color you're on. After that, I will alpha lock that layer so that none of my pixels or colors on my current layer can be budged, so I can cleanly color in the inside. So for me, I like to start off with the skin, so oftentimes I will put down the base color as the kind of almost the brightest tone of their skin, because I tend to like shading more or less for like, I guess like just how my brain works. It's easier for me to have like a base tone and go darker and then eventually add like little highlights and stuff afterwards. And because we're working digitally, it is possible to do that with no problems of pulling highlights later. I do find myself doing kind of like the opposite if I'm working with a darker background or lighting for like the atmosphere or the setting of like for the illustration. So sometimes it's a little bit easier for me to drop in majority of like the shadow color first, and then we can pull out highlights to kind of create a little bit more definition and form for the face, or even like clothing structures. A lot of the times when I'm working with, let's say, darker colors, I tend to do that method as well. It's easier for me to get lighter rather than pushing it towards like black, because sometimes if things get too dark, then it really lacks the contrast a little bit too much. But I'm slowly kind of going through the coloring process, and you can see that I'm changing the kind of the color and the hue of just like the lines or the sketches at this point, just because it kind of appears a little bit softer if I have it as a more muted kind of purpley brown, rather than having it that really dark kind of warmish purple that I had initially. And it's usually the color that I tend to sketch with rather than sketching with black, just because it's a little bit easier for me to adjust the color to be softer with the hue, saturation, and value sliders. So that's kind of like mainly why I sketch with kind of like a dark purple color, if anything, rather than picking like a very muted, like pretty much like a solid gray, a solid like anywhere between white and black. I don't usually choose unless I know I don't want to color in the lines, or if I want to alpha lock it and then fill the layer afterwards, then that is an option. But just this kind of like way just makes a little bit more sense for me, and it's like the quickest way for me to adjust the colors a little bit easier before we kind of color in the actual figures. I'm trying to think what else. Oh, another reason why I even wanted to do a sketch page. So I was not going to have the energy to be able to do a full illustration. I find myself being closer to the 4 to 6 hour like amount of time range. I guess like the time range between 4 to 6 hours for me to finish a what I would consider a simpler full portrait recently. And I usually used to kind of like push these out a lot quicker, if anything. And I don't know if it's because I spend a lot more time just rendering and just like mindlessly doing it to the point where I repeat and make the progress just a lot longer, which isn't a bad thing, but it does make me usually try to break up the drawing session into several days instead, or like between 2 days, so that I don't get too tired from working on one drawing per an entire session, because drawing and sitting down just for like 6 hours, definitely not good for you. So I don't recommend you doing that. So hopefully just make sure to take breaks. Oh, that's another thing actually. So let me actually finish this topic first. So yeah, I decided that I wanted to do sketch pages also because it's easier for me to knock out as many drawings that I want of the character in a little bit more of like a condensed amount of time. So technically, I think this might have been closer to 4-ish hours, 3 to 4 hours maybe. I can probably look on my Procreate, but it's a little bit less than me doing like a full illustration. And technically, I did like 3 colored sketches. So I feel like it just balances out a little bit better for me in terms of if I don't want to waste time trying to sketch and try to figure out how I want to draw just one little thing of Aventurine, I could just do 3 and then see which one that I like and spend more time on like a specific one rather than just on one entire one that I could potentially hate. But in terms of like time and taking a break and like not sitting around for too long, there is like I guess it's like considered a game on Steam called Spirit City, and I saw someone else use it on Twitter and I downloaded it and I've been using it kind of like on and off. So if I know I'm gonna have a longer session, I use Spirit City. So let me break it down a little bit easier. So basically the game is a way for you to track tasks. You can collect like little spirits, you can customize your room and your avatar a little bit, and you can set like timers. So I think it's similar to, I think it's called Pomodoro, kind of like how people study. So you can set out how long you want to study or do your work session for, and then you can also schedule in your breaks, and then you can set how long you want your timer to be, I guess. So like, let's say, I think for mine, I have it as 30 minutes 3-minute break, 30 minutes, 3-minute break for 3 sessions, and then I will restart the timer again. And it's just been helping me to make sure that I don't stare at my screen for too long. I am staying hydrated and just like making sure I get up and walk around a little bit from time to time. But I think like it's just nice because you can kind of customize it towards your own habits or even just like your preferences. So definitely check out Spirit City if you're interested. I've been really liking it, and it's been released like fairly recently. And yeah, I've been using it quite a bit for the most part. I'm hoping they add more little critters or like other options to the customizability to it, because I think for how long I used it, I've already burned through collecting all the little spirits. But yeah, all their options are super, super cute. So yeah, highly recommend. So in terms of the sketch page, I would consider like on the second last step of the entire, or I guess like we could break it down even to like the third last step of the sketch page, which is just a little bit of like partial rendering. So for the most part, whenever I do a sketch page, I usually have a like kind of like at least one idea of something that I want to draw, so that I can place it as kind of like our focal point of the entire sketch page. So it tends to be the largest one. It also tends to be the one that I put the majority of my effort into rendering compared to the surrounding little sketches. So in this case, the first one that I drew is the one that I liked the most. So I spent the most time on coloring, rendering, and sketching it. And it is also the largest sketch on the sketch page. So I can kind of consider that one the main sketch of the page. And then the rest of them, I kind of render depending on my mood for the most part. So I kind of go in order of usually how I sketch them, and that usually determines also usually like my energy level. So the less in front or like at the forefront or like at the focal point, I guess, I spend a lot less time on detailing it or anything like that. They tend to get a little bit more derpy and a little bit more simplified as well in terms of like style or detailing as well. But I think like sketch pages, other than the ones that I did for my OCs, I tend to make them a little bit less like pressure on myself, if that makes sense, because I do keep in mind that this is kind of like you're going to be in a sketching mindset. So like nothing needs to look like super polished. Nothing needs to be like super accurate either. So it kind of allows me to have a little bit of that freedom. And sometimes I do abandon a lot of sketch pages as well after the sketching phase, which is kind of sad because sometimes the coloring actually just like fixes or even like revitalizes my love for the sketch page. So I have like probably 3 to 4 different Wanu ones that I, in like my 17 folders where I haven't finished. But I think that's like another thing that I just struggle with sometimes. I don't want to spend too much time on one piece if I can't do it within like a few days. Sometimes I think like the second most recent Keep Me Company video, where I tend to do like finishing up drawings, or I try to do kind of like sessions that are a little bit longer and usually has like soft music in the background too. So I think there was some that was more like, I think there was like Niji fan art. So I had Albin, I think I had Reimu and Petra, and then I had Ike, I think, were the 3 in that video. And basically I think the majority of them were probably sketched almost, I think, a month to 3 months of not working on them. And usually if I don't work on a piece after, I guess like 2-3 weeks, I feel like I tend to just abandon them. If anything, I never really opened the file up, or I never returned back to whatever stage of drawing that I'm in for that piece. But I tried my best to push myself through that kind of like little hump of not being able to bring myself to kind of like finish these drawings that I've abandoned from a few months ago. And I'm trying my best to get better at that, because I have so many drawings that have potential, but it's just been too long that I don't feel the need or the energy to even want to revisit them. So maybe once I can get my computer issues kind of like figured out, if you haven't been following me on Instagram and listening to my weird computer troubles, basically I bought a new computer at the beginning of January to kind of allow me to do longer recordings. And because of my camera, it's been taking up a lot of space. So I needed to do at least an upgrade, and I got a new desktop. And this one has been causing me so much trouble in terms of like the power supply might be faulty, the back panel, just like some ports might be faulty. It has internet issues and Bluetooth connection issues, just too many things. So I'm probably going to get a professional to come take a look at it first to see if it is a few problems and whether or not I can get it fixed for a decent price. And then I will be able to move back all my setup back into my room, because that's kind of the reason why I can't stream, is because I moved my setup to a different room, and the entirety of like internet connection, all this stuff has been so shoddy that I was not able to. But maybe in the future, if I can get that fixed, I will stream myself finishing as many whips as I can that I have lingering on my Procreate, because I think that would be enough motivation for me to work on them, and I have plenty, so I'll definitely see if I can do that. And if I don't, someone please remind me and yell at me being like, finish your whips. So yeah, I think we're pretty much at the end. So the last two things that I like to do for sketch pages tends to be kind of like additional little sticker effects or text, which I put his name and I put a little bit of like sparkles here and there. And then the last thing that I like to do usually is, because these sketches tend to overlap one another, is that I like to add a white outline around all the sketches so that they can stand out from one another, but they can kind of stand out from the background as well. I feel like I'm stuttering a lot today. So last thing that I decided to do is also to mess around with the background. So instead of leaving it as a solid fill like I usually do, and I actually think I prefer the solid fill over this, I decided to use the old beach brush to do a texture, kind of like a watercolor texture, and bleed in kind of like a teal turquoise color into the red as well to give it a little bit of variation. Not sure if I really like it in terms of like the texture of how I did the background, but it's okay. I can fix it later if I really need to. But at this point, usually after I finish kind of like these sessions or these sketch pages, I don't revisit them. So yeah, probably what you see is probably what you're gonna get. So that's it for the time-lapse replay. I'll put the finished time-lapse at the very, very end. But hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video and all my rambliness about some issues I've been having. But I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!